Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Margaret, and here I share real-life stories from my friends at the nursing home. You don't deserve a vacation, my son said, as he slammed the door. He didn't know the account he wanted to drain was still in my name. The teacup rattled slightly on the saucer in front of me. Not from the slam. The door had long since stopped trembling, but from my hands. I had lived 65 years on this earth, seen grief, loss, and silence swallow rooms whole, but nothing quite prepared me for the sound of your own child declaring you unworthy of rest. Not love, not appreciation. Rest. I stayed seated at the kitchen table for some time after he left, unmoving. The mint tea had turned cold, a thin film stretching across the top like skin on cooling soup. I stared at it, as if it might offer an answer. The morning light filtered in through the lace curtains I'd had since the 90s. They were yellowing around the edges. Everything in the house was wearing out. The upholstery on the old armchair, the watermarks on the ceiling, the little crack in the window pane by the sink. Me too, I suppose. My name is Ellen Graves. I was born in 1960, and for most of my life, I did what I thought I was supposed to do. Be polite, work hard, save. I never asked for much, never made a scene. I was the kind of woman people described as dependable. And for decades, I found a strange dignity in that. I married Harold when I was 22. He was steady, like me. We never had much. He taught middle school science, and I worked as a bookkeeper at a local print shop before earning my CPA. We clipped coupons, even after we didn't need to. He drove his rusted Ford until the passenger door wouldn't open. Our idea of luxury was one fancy dinner out every year. Our anniversary at the Italian place downtown, with white tablecloths and a single candle on the table. We were saving for retirement. We had a dream. The Amalfi Coast. I don't know how it started, but we'd collect photos and snippets, magazine clippings, stories from friends who'd gone. We talked about lemon groves, cliffside villages, sun-drenched mornings with strong coffee, and nothing to do but breathe. When we're done with the working and the saving, he'd say, that's where we'll go. But he died in 2011, pancreatic cancer. It took him fast. One spring, he was mowing the lawn, and by winter, I was sitting in a cold room holding his hand, while machines beeped and hissed. Aaron was 30 at the time, newly married to Lila. They offered to help, and I let them. It started slowly. They moved into the guest room, just for a while, to save up for a down payment. I said yes. I always said yes. I thought if I gave enough, they'd feel secure. I thought that's what a mother was supposed to do. But time passed, and they didn't leave. Their things crept in like vines. First came the giant television, then the bar cart, the new espresso machine. I'd find Lila's clothes draped over the couch, her fancy heels lined up by the front door like a museum exhibit I was not invited to touch. You should really think about updating in here, she said one afternoon, walking through my living room like a realtor evaluating a teardown. I mean, the doilies are quaint. Aaron laughed. Don't make fun. It's Mom's aesthetic. It was a joke. I smiled weakly. But a part of me, a part I hadn't listened to in years, whispered, they don't see you. I cooked dinner most nights. They never helped with the dishes. They borrowed money, $100 here, $500 there, always with promises of paying it back, none of which ever materialized. I didn't push. I didn't want conflict. You have more than you need, Lila once said, arms crossed, as if my modest bank account was an offense. We're building our lives. You already had yours. I suppose she was right, in her own way. My life had felt quieter since Harold died. I read. I walked. I watched the garden grow. But then I heard them talking in the hallway one night. I was in the guest room, door ajar. They didn't know I was still awake. "She's sitting on a small fortune," Lila whispered. "We could flip the SUV and redo the kitchen and still have enough left." Aaron mumbled something I couldn't make out. Lila laughed. "She's going to die soon anyway. She drinks warm milk and watches British murder shows. She's barely living." The next morning, I stood at the sink washing dishes. Lila walked by and said cheerfully, "Oh, by the way, we're thinking of redoing the master bathroom. Hope you don't mind a little dust." The master bathroom. Harold and I built that bathroom together. Later that week, Aaron cornered me while I was folding towels. He was fidgeting, that nervous way he used to have when he was lying as a kid. "Mom, we've been thinking. It might be smart to transfer your savings into our joint account, just for emergencies. You know, in case something happens to you." "In case of what?" I asked. My voice was even, but inside something had gone very still. "You know, medical stuff, a fall, anything. We'd be able to access things quickly. For your benefit, too." I looked him straight in the eye. "Or for the down payment on that SUV?" He looked stunned for a moment. Then he recovered. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is pretending you're helping me while planning your next shopping spree with my money." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "You don't do anything, Mum. You sit here and hoard money while we're trying to build a future. You haven't taken a vacation in 20 years. Maybe you don't deserve one." And then the door slammed. He didn't know, and perhaps still doesn't, that the account he wanted so badly wasn't a shared one. I'd kept it in my name. The lawyer had suggested it years ago, and I had never gotten around to changing it. Maybe some part of me always knew. That night, after they went out to dinner, somewhere expensive, no doubt, I sat in front of my old laptop. It took forever to boot up. But I got in. The number was still there. $148,762.19. The Italy Fund. I had stopped calling it that after Harold died, but it was still there, stubborn and waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened another tab. One-way ticket to Naples, Italy? Departing in 3 days. I clicked book. Then I walked to the hall closet and pulled out my old suitcase. The zipper stuck. Dust clung to the edges like ash. I wiped it down and packed quietly. 2 skirts, 3 tops, a pair of walking shoes, my passport, a journal, Harold's old travel guide, still marked with notes in his neat block handwriting. Before I left, I scribbled a note and placed it on the kitchen table. "Gone exploring, don't wait up." I didn't look back. The plane touched down in Naples with a jolt that knocked my elbow off the armrest. I gripped the edge of the seat and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Around me, people clapped. Italians apparently celebrate landings. I smiled faintly. I didn't know the custom, but I joined in. For me, it wasn't about the flight. It was about surviving my own silence. As I stepped off the plane, a gust of warm, fragrant air kissed my cheeks. It smelled like stone and sea and citrus. I paused just outside the terminal, closed my eyes, and let the sounds of Italy wash over me. Horns honking in the chaotic distance, mopeds whining down tight alleys, a couple arguing passionately 2 feet from a cappuccino stand. It was loud, messy, unapologetic, the complete opposite of my life back home. And it felt like freedom. I stayed in a modest pensione near the Spanish Quarter. The walls were painted a faded coral, the kind of color that looks like it used to be loud, but had grown tired with time, a feeling I understood intimately. The room was small, but clean, with creaky floorboards and shutters that clanged at night in the wind. I didn't mind. It felt honest. The owner, Sophia, was a widow like me. Tall, wiry, her hair always tied back with a scarf. She spoke little English, but had expressive hands and kind eyes. On my second morning, she placed a warm pastry and strong coffee in front of me without asking. Perché sei qui da sola? She asked, tilting her head. Why are you here alone? I hesitated, then answered in my broken Italian. Mio figlio, dimentica chi sono. My son forgot who I am. She gave a slow, knowing nod. All children do, until they need money. We both laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed freely in years. I wandered for days, got lost on purpose, ate street food standing in alleys. I stumbled into churches with frescoes that made my chest ache. I spoke to strangers in broken sentences and surprised myself by not caring how clumsy I sounded. I visited the Amalfi Coast after a week in Naples. The bus ride was terrifying. Hairpin turns, cliffs that dropped into crashing blue. But when I arrived in Ravello, it felt like the world had exhaled. Stone buildings with ivy crawling up the walls, white linens flapping on clotheslines, women with sun-browned arms shelling beans on their doorsteps. It didn't feel like a postcard. It felt like a secret. I found a tiny apartment with a view of the sea. Blue shutters, chipped and peeling. A courtyard with lemon trees. The landlady, Renata, was fierce and unsentimental. She squinted at me and said, Sei sola? Are you alone? Yes, I answered. She nodded and muttered, Meglio così. Better that way. The rent was modest. I paid in cash. Renata didn't ask for references. She only said, Don't leave food out. The cats will come. I unpacked slowly, savouring the newness of ownership. Not of a place, but of time. Of mornings. Of myself. Every day, I walked. Ravello was full of steps. Stone ones that made your knees ache, but led to vistas that made you forget your legs existed. I breathed in rosemary and old earth. I sat on benches and watched old men argue about soccer in the piazza. I wrote in my journal every night, mostly thoughts, some memories, some truths I hadn't let myself write before. I raised a boy who learned to take. I taught him that I would never say no. I erased myself to make space for others, and no one ever told me to stop. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. On a rainy Wednesday, I ducked into a local library to escape a sudden downpour. Inside, dim and musty, I scanned the spines of books I couldn't yet read and felt that quiet joy of being hidden in plain sight. That's when I saw him, Matteo. He was helping an elderly woman with her internet card. Tall, early 40s maybe, with laugh lines and a faded university hoodie. We locked eyes briefly. I gave him a polite nod. Later, I found out he was the local Italian teacher. Twice a week, he offered beginner classes for expats and bored retirees. On a whim, I signed up. My brain resisted at first, creaking like an old drawer, but Matteo was patient, charming. He never dumbed anything down. One day, after class, he asked, Why are you here, Ellen? I hesitated. I didn't want to spill everything, but something in his tone felt safe. I think I forgot how to live for myself, I said. He smiled gently. Italy is a good place to remember. The next plot twist came through email. I had kept my phone on airplane mode for weeks, but that morning I turned it on. 37 messages. 12 missed calls. The latest email from Aaron read, We can't pay rent. Where are you? What are we supposed to do? You emptied the account without telling us? Seriously, we're family. You don't just disappear? Call me. And then, another one, minutes later. Lila says we should sue. She thinks the house belongs to us. Is this really what you want? To screw over your own family? I felt nothing. No anger, no panic. Just a clear, calm wave of realization. They still didn't get it. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing access to me. I responded with one sentence. You were never entitled to what I never promised. And I blocked them both. The next week, I visited a lawyer in Salerno, an expat from Canada who specialized in relocation and wills. I changed everything. I transferred ownership of the house in Ohio to a small trust and arranged for it to be quietly sold. The proceeds? I donated half to a scholarship fund for women over 50 returning to school. The rest I placed in a private European account. For me. Just me. Poetic revenge isn't about slamming doors. It's about building a new one that only opens for you. And then came the final twist. One night, I sat at dinner with Matteo and a few other language students, an American artist, a retired Irish nurse, and a German man who made violins. We talked and laughed and drank cheap wine until the stars came out. After the others left, Matteo lingered. He leaned in slightly and said, "You know, you don't have to go back. Not if you don't want to." I looked at him. "I wasn't planning to," I replied. He grinned. "Good. You belong here more than most of us." And in that moment, under the stars of a village I had once only dreamed of, I felt it. Not escape. Not rebellion. Belonging. There are kinds of peace you can't name until you've lived through war. In the beginning, mine was a quiet kind, like air after a storm. I'd wake up before the sun and open the shutters to see the first blush of gold on the sea. The town still slept. The baker hadn't yet opened his doors. Birds moved lazily between the rooftops, and the scent of lemons drifted on the morning breeze like a blessing. I had arrived here, not with a bang, but with a whisper, gone exploring, don't wait up. And now I wasn't just visiting, I was becoming. The woman I had been, the soft-spoken accountant who made herself smaller so others could breathe more easily, began to shed like old skin. At first, I feared this new version of me wouldn't hold, that she was just a performance. But she stayed, day after day, walk after walk, word after word. I began eating dinner late, like the locals. I took naps in the afternoon without guilt. I said no when I didn't want to do something, not with an apology, but with a smile. Sometimes the absence of noise, of need, was louder than anything else. In that silence, my thoughts became clearer. For so long, my life had revolved around roles: wife, mother, caretaker. I had built routines around making others feel safe. Aaron scraped through college because I took a second job. Harold made it through chemo with me at his bedside every night. Even after Harold was gone, I remained loyal to a life of service. I didn't know how to want things. I only knew how to offer them. Italy taught me to want again. I began to crave beauty, not in magazines, but in moments. I bought a turquoise shawl from a street vendor and wore it just because the color made me feel alive. I visited gardens alone and stayed until closing. I spent an entire afternoon learning to make gnocchi from a neighbor who spoke no English but communicated in salt, hands, and laughter. There was one moment that stood out. I was sitting on the balcony, journaling, when I heard a familiar song playing from a wedding across the square. An old jazz tune Harold used to hum while shaving. It stopped me mid-sentence. The grief rose suddenly like a wave, sharp, cold. But then, something unexpected. Relief. I didn't have to miss him in the same way anymore. I could let the ache evolve into gratitude. Not that he was gone, but that he had ever existed. I whispered, "Grazie, amore mio." "Thank you, my love." And meant it. A month later, Matteo invited me to his cousin's birthday celebration in Salerno, a sprawling affair with 3 generations, 2 screaming toddlers, and more pasta than any single group of humans should consume. I expected to feel like an outsider. I didn't. His mother took my hand after dinner and said in slow, careful English, "You belong." It almost undid me. Later that night, Matteo and I stood by the water, watching the moon ripple across the Black Sea. He handed me a small paper packet. "Open it." Inside was a single photo, a snapshot someone had taken at the party. Me, laughing, a fork in one hand, wine glass in the other. My head was thrown back mid-laugh. "That's the version of you I see," he said. "I barely recognize her," I whispered. "Then get to know her." He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The intimacy was in the seeing, something I had lived too long without. Back in Ravello, life continued, soft and full. I painted, badly. I sang while sweeping. I joined a poetry group. I even got a small dog, a rescued mutt with one floppy ear and a permanent sneeze. I named him Bruno. He slept at my feet and growled when the wind knocked over the shutters. One day, Renata surprised me with a cake on my birthday. I hadn't told anyone, but she said, "Women like us remember faces, not dates." We sat under the lemon tree, and she poured 2 glasses of Prosecco. "To reinvention," she said. I raised my glass. "To refusing to disappear?" Then came the letter. A thick, cream-coloured envelope forwarded from my attorney in the States. It wasn't from Aaron or Lila this time. It was from a lawyer representing Lila's parents. They claimed that I had exploited the goodwill of family and abandoned dependent kin without legal or ethical closure. It included vague threats about civil litigation, inappropriate withholding of inherited funds, and, my personal favourite, emotional abandonment. I laughed, alone, in my courtyard. The dog barked like it was in on the joke. I didn't respond. My attorney did, with receipts, timelines, signed documents. The facts spoke louder than any accusations. But something deeper settled in me after that. They weren't just bitter. They were lost. And I no longer lived in their maze. The power was gone. I had stepped outside their orbit, and they were still spinning in place, looking for someone to blame. It was tragic. But it wasn't mine to fix. One evening, I wrote Aaron one last letter, not to send, just to release the words. "Dear Aaron, I gave you everything I had, not just money, time, safety, sacrifice. When you were sick, I stayed up with you. When you struggled, I picked up the slack. Not because I expected something in return, but because I loved you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person. I became a wallet, a roof, a placeholder. When I needed kindness, I got contempt. When I asked for space, I was mocked. I am not angry anymore. I am not heartbroken. I am simply done. I love you, but I also love myself now. That's the difference. Live your life. I'm living mine. Mom." I folded it neatly, placed it in the journal, and let it stay there. Not to reopen a wound, but to mark its closing. A year passed. The days grew longer. My Italian improved. Bruno got fatter. The small apartment felt like home. Not just where I slept, but where I belonged. One afternoon, I was planting basil in my tiny garden box when Renata's granddaughter ran up to me, breathless. "Signora Ellen, vieni, the American woman. She's at the cafe asking about you." My heart skipped. I stood, brushed off my hands, and followed her. At the cafe, sitting alone with oversized sunglasses and a flashy handbag, was Lila. She looked tired, thin. Her hair, once perfectly styled, hung limp. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they landed on me. Her face changed. Not anger, not triumph. Desperation. Ellen, she said, please. I stood at the edge of her table, calm. I shouldn't have come, but things are bad. Aaron lost his job. We're underwater. We thought maybe you could. I raised one hand gently. Lila, I said, soft but firm, I hope you find your footing, but I am not your ladder anymore. She blinked. I smiled kindly. Take care. And I walked away. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the balcony, Bruno curled beside me. The sea was dark, glistening, alive. Somewhere below, music drifted up. A wedding, maybe. A life beginning. So many women like me get erased, softened until they disappear into other people's needs. But not this time. I reached for my journal and wrote my final entry on the last page. They told me I didn't deserve a vacation, so I booked a one-way ticket to myself, and I closed the book.